Okay, so we're recording now. I'm not sure. I'm just going to put this to the full presentation. Welcome to anybody joining us. I can't actually see. Nicola and Josiane able to see whether people are joining? You could just keep an eye on that while I've got the slides up.
Yes, they are. We have 10 participants already.
Wonderful. Welcome everybody who's joining us. I'm so pleased that you're here, and I'm also relieved that the link is working. So this is good. This is good news. Wonderful.
Hi, Daisy, Dion. Sorry, I probably shouldn't say names, should I? I won't say names. Hi, everybody.
Oh, no, but welcome to everyone. I can't actually see who's joining, but you're all here, so welcome.
You're all very welcome, but I won't say names because of...
You are so welcome. Absolutely. Okay, folks, thank you so much for joining us. We're a few minutes before 6 o'clock, so we'll just wait for a few more people to be logging on, and we'll be starting just after 6 o'clock. So welcome. And I believe that cameras and mics are disabled, so feel free to heckle or be wearing whatever you want. It's fine, make yourself comfortable. Oh, I can see the chat. Hey Daisy, lovely to see you. Okay, I'm just setting the chat to everybody. Okay, so hello, hi Louise, so pleased you could make it. Wonderful to see you. Well, see you virtually, as it were. Okay, I'm just going to keep an eye on the time. I'm currently in this situation where I've got hi Lauren, so pleased that you're here. Hey Christy, hi now. I'm so pleased you're here. One of the stars of the show. Wonderful. Yeah, do feel free to type in the chat and say hi. The session is being recorded. I'll do my full spiel at the start when we start officially, but do say hello. Do say hello. And I feel that I can actually shut off my other computer now, because I think if people are joining, then something or other has worked. So I haven't got that distraction. There we go.
Oh, I can officially now say hello, Mum. She's just joined.
Thank you so much for being here. How are we looking for attendees at the moment?
We've got 17. So
wonderful.
We could give people another couple of minutes, but then I think we'll start.
Okay, lovely. That's great. Yeah, we're just on 6 o'clock now, so we will just give it another moment. Welcome everybody. Hi. That's such a lovely. Daisy says hello, Nicola's mom. Your daughter. Oh, she is. Hi Meena, I'm so glad you can join us. Hi everybody. Okay, so we're just a minute past. How are we looking for attendees?
18.
Lovely. Okay, that's absolutely great. So I haven't been letting people in, so I think people can just join, so that's okay. It means that I haven't got to keep clicking back into like a seminar or anything like that. Okay, so I've just taken my chat away, but if Nick and Josiane, if you can just keep an eye on that in case anybody's saying anything we need to know. Okay, and I think we'll get started then. Right. Welcome, and thank you so much to those of you joining us this evening. You have arrived at our contribution to this year's Being Human Festival, and this event is Laughter is the Best Medicine, Comedy and COVID. So I hope that's what you were expecting. Okay, so this is part of the Riches series, a series of events at the University of Wolverhampton. I'm going to say a little bit more about that at the end, but to start off, I want to thank Professor Meena Dhanda for organising the bid that has enabled us to actually put on this event this evening. So thank you, Meena, and thank you for being here as well. And I'll just say another
thank you, Meena.
Yeah, thank you, Meena, at the very end about what else is in store in this exciting series as well. So before we begin the event properly, quickly, I'm just going to do a little bit of housekeeping. I've got a bit of a preamble to go through, so just bear with me. So this event, as you probably realised already, is set up as a webinar, which means that your cameras and mics are off. So I hope that you're wearing comfortable clothes and eating whatever noisy snacks that you feel like. Feel free. However, we do want this to be as interactive as it can be, given the format. So please do share comments and questions at any point in the chat rather than the Q&A. If you put them at either, we'll see them, but I think we're going to go for the chat for most of the session, and I'll say more about that. As you might have gathered already, the session is being recorded, so please bear that in mind when using the chat function. And so in terms of not sharing any personal details, or indeed anybody else's personal details due to data protection. Okay, so my name is Helen Davies, and my colleagues co-leading this session this evening are Nicola Allen and Josiane Boutonnet. Together, we have been collecting memes and funny stories from contributors over the past few months. And the purpose of tonight's event is to explore some ways in which comedy has helped us cope with the pandemic, and to, this is the most important bit, discuss some submissions from our participants. Now, we have also produced some artworks, and I use that term loosely for my contributions. Nicola has produced some artworks, which are based on the contributions that we're going to be talking about this evening. And I would like to invite everybody here today to join us in person at the Lighthouse Media Centre in Wolverhampton on this Saturday the 20th of November, between 3 and 5 p.m, to come and check out the exhibition and celebrate our contributors. So actually that exhibition is going to be available for everybody. It's up there now, and it will be available to anybody going into the Lighthouse for the rest of November and hopefully into December as well. So at the end, I'm going to put the booking link in the chat, but I will share that again via email to all audience members. And in that same email, I will also be asking, I'll have a quick form, easy to use form for feedback on this event, because that's one of the conditions of the Being Human Festival giving us the money to do the event. And we really would like to hear your feedback about the evaluation of how you've experienced this evening and the exhibition as well. Right, so I'm just going to try, that's it, click on the next slide. So the real stars of our show this evening are our participants. We want to say a very, very big thank you to all of those who have submitted their entries for this session this evening and the exhibition via email and via social media. We would not have been able to do this without you, and I very much hope that, I know that some of you are in the audience this evening. So we have tried, and I'll just click onto the next slide of our wonderful participants. We have tried to include as many of your submissions as possible in the talk this evening, but if they're not here, please don't worry, they are definitely in our exhibition. Okay, now, this is a bit ominous, but bear with me. I want to begin with a health warning, which of course we've all become far too used to, but this is slightly different, and I do hope that it's going to be a little bit clearer than some of the government messages that we've had during the pandemic. Okay, clearly there is nothing funny about the pandemic. This global pandemic, which is still continuing, has been the most dreadful time for all of us in so many different ways. As I said, there's nothing funny about that. However, we are interested in exploring humour as a coping mechanism, and the ways in which comedy can renew our energy and help us to find resilience to continue in even the most difficult times. In addition, humour is hugely subjective and it can cause offence. We recognise that not everybody will find things amusing, and of course we're all coming from different places in terms of what makes us laugh and indeed what doesn't. Our coverage this evening is necessarily partial, and it reflects the submissions that we've received. We're not trying to do something comprehensive. It's been very much led by our wonderful people that have contributed towards this. So, as I said before, we would be delighted at any point, you know, type in the chat, make comments, ask questions, share further jokes. Yeah, this is, you know, we want to keep this going in the chat as we go along, and we'll be coming to those at the end. We've left time for that at the end. However, we also ask that you be respectful of the views and feelings of others. Okay, just a few more things before we get on to the fun bit. Myself, Nicola and Josiane, we all work in the wonderful humanities department at the University of Wolverhampton, and we all have research interests in comedy, which is sort of the foundation of this event. So Nicola and I are English literature lecturers, and Josiane lectures in language and linguistics. Comedy studies, which unites us all, are interdisciplinary, and this reflects the department we work in. So if you're interested in learning more about what we do in humanities at Wolverhampton University, please check out our range of undergrad and postgrad courses via our website, and you can click the link and find out a bit more about the other interesting things that go on in the department. Okay, very quickly. Just a comment on format. Josiane is going to begin properly after me to give some context for thinking about humour as being good for us and also as a coping strategy. Then Nicola is going to talk a bit more about the social context of the pandemic and humour, and then we're going to get to talking about our submissions. As we go through, please, you know, I invite you all, do tell us in the chat about which submissions that you've enjoyed and why as well. Now, when we initially advertised this event, we said we were going to do a vote on the best entry. The fact of the matter is, we've had so many wonderful entries. We don't feel that doing this in a competitive way is quite in the spirit of the event, really. So, as you know, essentially everyone wins, yay! But we would love to hear your views about what has made you laugh during this session. So if you could participate along the way, telling us what you enjoy and why, or indeed contributing more, we would be absolutely delighted. But as I say, just to remind you of what I said about being respectful and understanding of other people's points of view. Okay, enough from me, and without further ado, let me hand over to my colleague Josiane.
Oh, thank you, Helen. Right, so the first thing I want to start talking about is what's so good about humour, really. The first thing I'll say is that humour in its varieties of forms and modalities occur in all human cultures. So it is ubiquitous, it is everywhere, and also humour is a quintessentially social phenomenon. People of all ages, cultures experience humour probably on a daily basis in their conversations, in their activities, whether those are face-to-face or whether they are on social media, and also in their observations about the world around them. Now, there's a widespread belief that in the importance of humour. Not only it is ubiquitous, but also we think that it is very important in human societies. And indeed, we often think that without humour, life would probably be unbearable. Bakhtin, to quote somebody famous and to show a little bit of academic research here, said that humour is an alternative conception of the world that exists alongside everyday modes of interpretation. So humour is important, it is important to understand, and because it bestows many benefits. So it gives us, there are physical benefits to engaging in humour, to laughter, and psychological benefits and social benefits. And I'm going to go through all those separately. So next slide, please. Thank you. So the physical benefits of humour, they are actually very well documented. So there is a large body of research on the physical benefits of humour. A lot of research, as Helen has pointed out, humour research is very much multidisciplinary. A number of subjects, disciplines contribute to humour research. So whether it's media, linguistics, literary studies, psychology, two of the largest subjects contributing, or in the past that have contributed to humour research, have tended to be psychology and linguistics. But a lot of humour researchers, scholars, have taken their interest in humour and their research in humour into applied settings. So what are the applications? How can studying humour be of value to us, you know, in the real world? So with regards to the physical benefits of humour, they are very well documented. And there is a lot of work which has been done in certain specific areas of specific medical settings and specific areas of health. So probably the next slide now. So with regards to, for example, pain, clinicians have looked at how humour can help with physical pain. Now, humour may not be the best remedy for all ailments. I'm not saying laughing will sort everything out, but it can help with certain specific aspects of ill health. So for example, one is pain and pain management. And research in this area has led to specific targeted interventions as part of pain therapy. Now, I don't know if any of you have ever seen the film about Patch Adams. It's not such a recent example of a movie, but it's a movie based on real events. It's a biographical comedy drama starring Robbie Williams, which portrays the story of a doctor who is taking humour into a clinical setting with great benefits. So humour is also good for our psychological health. So there are psychological benefits. So it contributes, for example, to emotional health, and to our well-being generally. And here again, a lot of the work has been done in psychology, and psychologists have taken their research on the benefits of the psychological benefits of humour in applied settings, and they have been able to demonstrate the benefits of humour for us all. Now, humour is also important in social relationships, so the social benefits of humour. So next slide, please. So we have, it's important in all sorts of things. It's important in learning, in social benefits. And it is a widely attested and intuitively grasped aspect of human social communication. So as I said in the beginning, humour is a quintessentially social phenomenon. So it is important when we're looking at relationships and social, the social settings, that humour plays an important role there. Humour can help us deal with embarrassing situations. It can help us also deal with grief. It can ease criticism. And also on a social level, humour attracts attention and admiration. Now, people generally like funny people. So it's clearly an attribute that is valued in our society. Okay, next slide, please. So what we found when we looked at our data is that there are various themes which have emerged in the data that we've looked at. Now, our data is very specific to a context. So we have to remind ourselves that this is, a lot of our data has been probably British centric. So data which has come about from, which have been handed to us from people in our own culture. But I will be making references to other cultures and some studies which have been done in other cultures. So themes, well, we all remember all these aspects of the pandemic since the start, since March 2020. So some of those themes that have emerged have come from being able to cope with, helping us with coping with lockdown. We went through a number of lockdowns since March 2020. Coping with homeschooling, so people who have children at home and how they've managed that, as well as perhaps working from home. In the very beginning of lockdown as well, empty shelves, so not being able to get any loo rolls or flour for some reason, pasta. So what we find as well when we look at the themes is that those types of jokes or humor has changed over time, which reflect the very specific moments of the pandemic as well. Coping with increased use of technology and working from home, coping with uncertainty, with the complexity of the changing rules, management of health measures, the track and trace and how efficient or inefficient that has been, the vaccination programs, the variants of the virus, all of this. Also quite a lot of humor to do with masks and the wearing or not of masks. A lot, of course, about the government itself or the people responsible for managing the pandemic and the measures to alleviate the effects of the pandemic. So these are some of the examples of the various themes that we've collected. So the next thing I'll talk about is our data and the kinds where our data comes from. And there is a term I want to introduce, which is a word that we call computer-mediated communication in language study, which is a term which refers to various forms of communication used through networked computers. And those can be synchronous or asynchronous. They can involve one-to-one conversations or one-to-one communication, or one-to-many or many-to-many exchanges of text, but also audio files and also video messages. And a lot of our data has come from individuals who've collected their memes or examples of humor from social media. So I thought I'd remind ourselves of what that means. And social media basically refers to a specific set of internet-based networked communication platforms. And on the next slide, you can see some examples of where that data has come from. So we haven't actually used audio files in this presentation, but some of the data I came across and collected during the pandemic came from platforms like TikTok, so video recordings of people who have done things, not just images and pictures, but also audio and video files. And indeed, today, our access to technology and things like mobile phones and other recording devices, they've turned every one of us into amateur producers, always at the ready to broadcast our daily encounters and turn our boring daily routines into an object of ridicule for the benefit of someone or everyone. So some of the data, therefore, comes from WhatsApp conversations, Twitter, perhaps Instagram as well, but we haven't used any of the data from TikTok in this presentation. So on the next slide, now we can see some examples of that data, and I'll talk a little bit about the functions of humor in relation to this. So when we're looking at the social functions of humor, one of the important functions of humor is that of social cohesion. It's to build an identity within a group, perhaps to establish common ground. So we use humor as a way of identifying, relating to people in very specific communities. So it helps us bond with each other. Okay. But humour can also be a form of resistance, and we will see in some of the examples that we have, it can be a way of resisting perhaps the ruling elite, the government, and so on. So in our conversations, but also in our virtual communications, humour can serve these two sort of functions. One, which is a lubricant, it can help this cohesion, or it can be an abrasive as well. It can be a way of antagonizing, provoking, creating tension and conflict. So it can be used as a form of attack and also as a form of defense, as a means of defense. So one important function of humour is that it helps us with coping with difficult and challenging circumstances. So as we can see here on those examples of memes, we have some early memes about the wearing of the mask, were about how to wear a mask, you know, and there were quite a lot of examples of memes of people who didn't know, or perhaps, you know, weren't wearing masks exactly in the way that we were instructed to do this. You know, that second meme below, seeing how some people wear their masks, which is a sign in the entrance of a shop, a deli, a delicatessen shop, saying, seeing how some people wear masks, I now understand how contraceptives fail. So this was a kind of a humorous way of reminding people of the wearing of the mask. So if you're walking into my shop, please, you know, wear a mask and wear it properly. Of course, all of us have had moments when we forgot, we didn't have our masks in our pocket, and we felt perhaps a bit peeved about that. So, you know, having, you know, that particular meme here of this vulture, it's quite an interesting picture, I think, because the very representation of that vulture as someone, we can connect with that feeling of feeling a little bit fed up and having to walk back to our car to fetch our mask because we can't walk into a building, etc. And of course, some people capitalized on this idea of the mask by selling Easter bunnies, chocolate bunnies wearing masks. So, you know, again, it's using humor in this case, as you know, for commercial purposes, and encouraging people to buy the chocolate. And these were clearly bunnies of the 2020s. So we will always remember those chocolate bunnies. Hopefully we won't get those next year. So when I talk about the subversive or conservative aspect of humor, this is to do with, does humor enable us to remind people of rules, of social rules, of codes of conduct? Do we use humor to enable, you know, to remind people that they need to conform? So this is really this kind of function of humor. It has a conservative, you know, it reminds people of the rules and how we should be behaving. So that's that kind of function. Does it enable us to cope and therefore support the social order? Or does it enable us to reflect critically, perhaps, on our situation, on the situation we're in, and can it potentially lead to action as well? So in any case, whether the humor we're using is subversive or conservative, what happens is that it opens up a discursive space within which it becomes possible to speak about matters that would perhaps otherwise remain unquestioned or silenced. So humor fulfills this really important function of enabling us to perhaps approach topics and discuss topics that perhaps are a little uncomfortable to talk about in any other way. So we could argue that you know, all these here, or at least 3 of those here, really fulfill that function of that conservative function, you know, reminding people of the social order. This is the situation we're in now. You know, we all need to do to make an effort and to help each other by wearing masks. Next slide is a slightly different one, which says wearing a mask inside your home is now highly recommended, not so much to prevent COVID-19, but to stop eating. So this is kind of, you know, making fun of perhaps the different habits or the way we've coped with humour, with the lockdown, you know, the being locked at home. And interestingly, in Ireland, and I was mentioning this to Helen and Nicola the other day, in Ireland they have a saying. They talked about lockdown, people coming out of lockdown having become either a chunk, a hunk, or a drunk. And these 3 things really reflect what was going on in large part during COVID and during the lockdown, because some people became really keen on exercising at home. So they were logging on to various online platforms to exercise, joining classes online. All of a sudden, you know, exercise classes were online and available to people. But there's lots as well of memes about people drinking as a way of coping and joking about that, whether it was coping with having children at home 24/7, and therefore what you needed to cope with that was, and homeschooling was drinking a little more than usual. But so, yeah, a hunk, a chunk, or a drunk. So this particular meme really is a kind of reminder of perhaps people's habits during lockdown. And there are some specific studies which have looked at whether people have put on weight during lockdown. And in some societies, in some places, that's been the case. I know that's the case in France. There's been a study that has been done of the amount of people who've put on weight during lockdown. So this refers back to, you know, excessive eating, and perhaps particularly in countries, I think, like France or Italy, where exercise and going out was really, really restricted compared to Britain. In Italy, people weren't allowed to go out at all, except for perhaps very, very specific reasons, or for work or to fetch food, perhaps. But in France, it was the same as well. The rules were very strict. If you went out, you needed to have a piece of paper with you where you stated where you lived, the time that you went out, where you were going, and you really had limited time to be out, and you could be stopped by the police, and people were stopped by the police on a regular basis to check whether they had that piece of paper with them. So it probably makes sense to think that people would have been more likely to put on weight if they weren't able to get out as often as we were. We were allowed to go out for at least an hour a day. So the next slide, please. So online humor during the pandemic, it has been used as a coping mechanism. And I just want to say something about, this coping mechanism across cultures, because while we are saying that humor is a universal phenomenon, it is also very much culturally dependent for its specific content on a particular time and place. So if we look at specific studies of humor generated in different cultures, we would find that there are different concerns expressed, or different, we get an insight into aspects of the culture of that community through the jokes or through the humor that they are telling in those social media platforms. So this is a particularly interesting study that I've looked at, which looks at online humor as a coping mechanism in the face of coronavirus pandemic, but in Kenya. So the Kenyan context. So it was published in the East African Scholars Journal of Psychology and Behavioral Sciences, and very interesting. Obviously, some of the jokes and the memes we would relate, we would understand, they would reflect you know, they might be similar to what we have found in our own culture, but there are clearly flavors. They are really they're culturally flavored, in my view, because they reflect some of the cultural context of that particular society. So when I was looking at that particular piece of research, it was interesting. There were quite a lot of the jokes used in the examples in the research, which had to do with religious beliefs and so quite an important element in that research, and the memes produced in that country used religious themes as a way of talking about the challenges posed by the pandemic. So the next slide, please. So that particular piece of research looked at memes shared specifically on social media platforms like WhatsApp. And social media platforms are really a fundamental part of online discussions, where user-generated content is shared and discussed by members of virtual communities. So an interesting article, an interesting piece of research that you might want to have a look at. So the next slide looks at one of the themes that, oh, sorry, no. I've just realized I've jumped too fast. So still the same piece of research. Oh, yeah, no, that's it. You can go to the next one. Thank you very much. So in conclusion, in that study, what they found was that overall, the humour transcended the domestic, educational, political, professional, religious, sexual, and social domains of human existence. So in the face of life-threatening calamities, people tended to resort to humour in order to evoke positive feelings and laughter by sharing funny content on these social media platforms. I mean, one of the ones I found quite interesting is this example at the bottom here. Gone are the days when people showed off with, I just come back from the UK, US, or China. If you brag now about traveling, you're going to be quarantined, you know, get quarantined. I really like that one, actually. Drawing attention to, you know, an aspect of the culture, how traveling abroad outside of your own nation once upon a time was regarded as something that, you know, you could brag about, or that showed you were a world global citizen. But now it actually is viewed negatively. So the next theme I'm going to look at specifically with regards to what we've collected and our data, politics and government, and there were quite a lot. There were quite a lot. And I suppose this takes me back to this idea that humour isn't always benevolent. You know, humour can be hostile, or humour can actually be very multifaceted, because on the one hand, it might bring about social cohesion. So those people who would have shared those memes criticizing the government would have known that the people they were sharing these memes criticizing the government would have appreciated those, provided that, you know, they were through WhatsApp groups. But even on Twitter, I suppose we can never know who reads those on this public platform. But there's an assumption that people would agree, and that sharing that kind of humor about the incompetence of a government, in this case, might bring about a kind of, you know, bring about that kind of social cohesion. And it helps us at the same time with coping with uncertainty and, you know, what was happening. At the same time, there's a clear target. So there's a clear hostile element. And this is where humor is very multifaceted. It can be benevolent. It can have this social function of bringing people together, laughing about something. But at the same time, in this case, it is also hostile. It is clearly targeting very specific individuals. The one thing I would say about humor is that there is nothing we're not prepared to laugh at. You know, whether we think that's ethical or not, ultimately, humans, we all will laugh at all sorts of things, especially if they're taboo, especially if they are controversial. So humor is you know, it really is pervasive to all human social encounters. And there's nothing we're not prepared to laugh at. And when we look at, for example, disasters, so, you know, we could think about those dreadful days during the pandemic when 1,000 or more people were dying each day. Very quickly, when we're thinking about disasters or awful events that happen, one of the ways in which we cope with that horrific sort of these horrific sort of facts, whether they're disasters or pandemics, we find that jokes circulate very quickly. It doesn't take long. Jokes about shocking events usually circulate within hours, if not, you know, days, if not hours of these events. And we see that when we're looking at disaster jokes. You know, they might cause outrage, but they also cause amusement to some. So some humor can be deliberately offensive, but they can also be highly popular. And the impact of mass media has increased significantly. And these new digital media have joined traditional media and enabled an even more rapid global circulation of these texts, sounds, images, to the point that we could say actually that our Western culture can be described as a media culture. And I'm quoting Kellner here. Okay, the next slide, please. Again, you know, we can see here clearly who the targets of these memes are. Mostly Boris Johnson, but also Hancock here, Matt Hancock. And, you know, we see this difference as well between those two supposedly, you know, heads of state, or, you know, Boris Johnson and Nicola Sturgeon, because throughout the pandemic, Johnson was often compared with Nicola Sturgeon, who was perceived in the media as able to manage the pandemic far better than we were in England. So, you know, these could be perceived as hostile, and I'm sure that people who are supporters of Johnson or people in government would not approve, probably, these kinds of memes, but they were very prevalent in a lot of social media platforms. So we did laugh at politics and the government and the government's managing of the pandemic. Next slide, please. So this is one from, because I collected quite a few in French as well, and this is our Prime Minister, President rather, of the Republic, Macron, and, you know, lots of memes about, you know, the lockdown, and this one is, you know, that's it, it's over, you can go out, and you can see how much he's aged. So you can see how, you know, we assume that this is years and years of lockdown. And the next slide as well. The next slide is Nick. So I think I'm done here. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Josiane. That was brilliant. And the first thing to say is, don't worry if you can't see that timeline. I just wanted to give you a sense of sort of, you get these kind of chunks of things happening, and then these periods where there's kind of less happening. So it's a timeline that was actually produced by the government, and I'll sort of talk you through some of the important dates and sort of try to kind of link this to the memes. I think the first thing to say is that in answer to our, you know, we have a question mark with is laughter the best medicine, and as a type 1 diabetic, I must also big up insulin, because that I find also hits the spot. But I think laughter is really important, and I think, as Josiane said, you know, Patch Adams kind of brings that you know, to our attention. But I want to start actually with so you won't be able to see this because it's too small, but it was around the 16th of March 2020 that that I think it became obvious that we were going to have some sort of a lockdown. And you can see the first column that's quite large is from March 2020. And I think one of the things that's happened during COVID is that time, especially time during lockdown, has gone kind of really strange. It kind of feels like it's been forever, but sometimes it also sort of feels as though it's sort of, you know, when we're coming out of lockdown, there was lots of fear that it was too soon. So time has kind of gone a bit funny, I think. If you feel that, I absolutely don't think that you're alone. So the lockdown came into effect for us in the UK on the 26th of March. So that was basically when the legislation went through. And that was when it became, you know, sort of basically a legal requirement that you should stay at home unless you were a key worker or you were going for your daily exercise or to go and fetch food. And I think I'm just thinking of that period between the 16th of March and the 26th of March. And I'd really be interested to hear your experiences of this as well in the chat, because I can remember during that period, I was kind of doing some of my last in-person sessions before we went online. And it is always a privilege to teach. But I think at that moment, I realised that we were living through something that was actually really unprecedented in living memory. And I was sharing that with my students. And I think there's a, you know, as a lecturer, you're sort of meant to kind of have the answers. And there was a moment in the last class that I taught before the measures came into force in person, where a couple of students had hung back at the end of the class. And one of the girls was expecting a baby. She was a couple of weeks away from delivering her baby. One of the other girls, both of her parents were nurses, and they were absolutely terrified about what was going to happen to them. And we talked about this for a bit, and we had already started social distancing. You know, some of the things that we now do had kind of already started. But I remember that the last thing that we said to each other was, the girl whose parents were nurses, we tried to make each other feel better. The last thing that she said to the girl that was going to have the baby was, you know, if she's born and if she's okay, might you call her Corona? And I think there's this sense of just trying to kind of use, you know, humour was the kind of thing we had. It was the thing that was left. And, you know, I'd be really interested. I bet you've got similar sort of stories of those last few in-person moments before the first lockdown. And we went into that thinking maybe it was going to be 3 weeks, but I think fearing it was probably going to be longer. We were all in fear of our own lives, the lives of our loved ones. I mean, it was a horrific moment in human history. And I think that, you know, that I bet lots of you have got those moments where there was kind of some sort of humour involved, because I think it's kind of what, you know, what we reached for. And I think the memes really was a way, obviously, once lockdown started and it became really obvious that the main way that you were going to communicate was through things like Zoom, which I have to confess I had not heard of before my sister's friend Bushra introduced me to it. And, you know, and it became very quickly, obviously, we would use things like Zoom to teach sometimes. We kind of just moved into the internet, and we're the first generation that's been able to do that. I mean, I think one of the things that sort of that really kind of struck home with the flu pandemic that came just after the First World War was that it was just completely different to ours. And I can remember hearing a story from a survivor of the flu pandemic, and she said there was a village down the hill. She was talking in, I think, the 1950s, it was recorded. So she's talking of her experience just after the First World War. And she was a child, and all of her family had died. And she said, I just thought, I need to go to the village. I need to go and get help. And she went to the village and she looked through the houses, and she said there were just bodies in the houses. And I think one of the things that we had that she didn't have was the ability to communicate with each other. And, you know, we just leapt on it. And I think that the kind of memes are just a fabulous way of sort of, you know, avoiding that awful experience. And I think we're so lucky in lots of ways to have Web 2.0 and to have the ability to communicate with each other. And yeah, I think we were I think we've split our memes into concepts, but those concepts, I think Josiane sort of said this as well, those concepts map onto the timeline of COVID really nicely. So the first one that you get tend to be ones that are focused on staying in, tend to be ones where you get sort of, you know, the slob on the sofa saying, I'm just saving the world, guys. And those ones that are about sort of, you know, kind of getting people to kind of do this. Because I think one of the things that, again, that I spoke about with my students just before lockdown was we talked about, well, if there is a lockdown, will people do it? How will they enforce it? We really had no idea how people would react. And I think one of the things that the memes also did was they allowed us to kind of do what we have to do. They allowed us to kind of police ourselves, to kind of legislate for ourselves, you know, so you very early on, you get these memes that are about staying at home, that are about how the lazy are going to save the earth. And then it sort of, you know, obviously within the first lockdown, there's homeschooling. So children, I've got a slide about this coming up in a while, but children kind of in and out of school, obviously sort of throughout lockdown, but very, very quickly you get slides about homeschooling. Actually, mask wearing, I think, feels like it's been forever, but masks weren't actually mandated until quite late, actually. So if I sort of take you through some of those key dates. So the lockdown is extended on the 16th of April 2020. The 30th of April, bear in mind, this is the government, I'm not going to be political, but this is the government's own published timeline. 30th of April, the Prime Minister says that we're past the peak of the virus. 10th of May 2020, we have this kind of lifting of some of the restrictions. And as you can see, things there's kind of like a little period in the middle where there's one or two things, not these big columns. So we get this kind of gradual easing. By July 2020, we have local lockdowns, we have restrictions getting eased, but places like Leicester going under kind of local lockdowns. By August, we have eat outs to help out. I'm going to just again remind you that this is the government's own timeline. They've chosen to remind you about this. But so we have this kind of eat out to help out. So we get this this kind of message that we need to go back out, because the economy needs us to do that. And I think what's really interesting is you can see that the memes are often pushing against that. So, you know, there is this lovely immediate response where you have memes that are still talking about stopping at home, and this kind of pushback from the idea that we should kind of go out. I think that by and large, you can find a meme that will basically consolidate any argument that you have, whatever political stance you are, whatever you feel about lockdown, you'll be able to find a meme that consolidates your views. But I do think that there was some really interesting ways in which those of us that whatever our views were may have been at risk of feeling isolated, people that are living alone, you found your community, and memes were a really quick way of letting people know that someone else feels the same way as you do. And so by October, we've had Boris Johnson say that we're at a critical moment. This is October last year, obviously. We get this kind of 3-tier system come into place, but we're told that Christmas is going to be safe. And of course, that kind of, you know, that isn't what happens. And by the 6th of January, we're in our 3rd national lockdown. And it's really interesting because it's not until the 15th of February this year that quarantine for travellers is actually introduced. I think that sort of quarantine became something that was talked about a lot. It feels like it's been going on for a lot longer, but it's actually, you know, not that long, I suppose, in the history of the pandemic. By the 8th of March, schools are starting to kind of reopen. And by the 29th of March, you can have outdoor gatherings, small numbers are kind of permitted. So we sort of start easing out, obviously. And I think until we get to the 21st of June this year, when all legal limits on social contact were removed, but some people were choosing to still do some things, obviously things like masks still recommended, but the legal compulsion to do so was actually removed. And again, I think it's there that memes kind of really take on another kind of, you know, life of their own. It's there that you can say how do you feel about this? Are you really relieved? Are you happy? Thank God it's over. Are you worried? And it's just a really lovely way of just getting the temperature, especially when you collect as many as Josiane does for her research. I think it's fabulous to be able to kind of see something of the temperature, albeit, as we acknowledge, it's it's obviously slightly kind of skewed by the kind of people that are going to send us their memes. I think the last thing that's not on the timeline, because it's an official timeline, it's serious. The last thing that I would like to add to that timeline is last week, a dinosaur was discovered because a retired GP had a box of bones and he decided to finally put them together. He'd been meaning to do this for like 30 years. And he finally had the time to put them together. And I think it's worth remembering that. And again, I think the memes show us that, not everything was kind of, not everything was awful. We suddenly had time that we'd never had before. So yeah, if we just look at the next slide, I'll just do this very quickly. You can see, again, I understand you're not going to be able to see this very well, but you can basically tell where the pandemic is. You can see these huge dips in GDP, which is basically the economic health of the nation. And you can see these huge peaks in the borrowing deficit. And I think these are really important and they're great and they're really useful. But I think what they do in combination with the memes is we can see what's happening and we can also see how people are reacting to that. And I do think that we are incredibly privileged to be able to do that. This hasn't really been possible. I can remember my nan telling this brilliant story about she was alive when the Second World War was declared and she was swinging on the garden gate with her little sister and her dad came out and said, stop swinging on that gate, we're at war with Germany. And her little sister said, what's that got to do with us swinging on the gate? And I think that, she had to wait sort of 70 years to tell anybody that story, really. But the thing about memes is you've got the stats, you've got the timelines, and you've got the human response. And I think this is why humanities are so important now, because, we've got the opportunity to really kind of record some of this stuff. So we're going to have a look at some of your, I'll sort of save time at the end, but I'm really interested to see your experiences of of those initial lockdowns and how maybe humour kind of helped you. But I think we need to move on because we're going to run out of time. Shall we move on to actually having a look at some of the memes that you sent to us?
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Nicola, and thank you to Josiane as well. Okay, so not everybody found staying at home difficult, and whilst responses to the initial lockdown in the UK varied, many felt able to express their love for the private space of the great indoors for the first time ever. And I want to give a shout out and thanks to Lauren for sharing these excellent memes here that express this sentiment. Although that's, kind of probably waned as the pandemic has persisted, there remain a lot of people who actually got to experience the world that they found less stressful in all sorts of ways. So let's just have a look at some more of the submissions we've got on the theme of the lockdown. Okay, so the meme here, the one on the left hand side featuring Snoop Dogg, which was submitted by Brian, so thank you very much to Brian if he's in the audience, demonstrates just one way in which the blanket stay at home message was adapted and parodied as well. Now, what I find interesting here is that the parody doesn't change the message. The emphasis is still on staying home and staying safe. So the one in the middle, I think, gives new meaning to the concept of being an armchair activist. The more sedentary and indolent among us, and I'm definitely referring to myself here, could claim a newfound validation in our lifestyles. All of these years of watching television have essentially just been practice for doing our bit to keep everybody safe. Now, the concept of staying at home in style, as performed fabulously on the slide by the late, great David Bowie, might have been aspirational for some of us. However, perhaps more of us can relate to the meme here in the top left-hand corner. Now, this is one of my personal favourites, and I often reflected on this when I'd wake up in the morning and put on yet another pair of leggings to start the day. So this selection here are using humour to make a serious point about the strain of the lockdown on our self-image, our family relationships, our daily horizons, and indeed our hopes and dreams as well. So thank you to Lee, Brian, and @Willow from Twitter for this excellent selection. So that meme in the bottom left-hand corner, that references the horror movie The Shining. Now, I must confess, there were times when I felt like I was actually channeling Jack Nicholson from the movie, not the bit where he goes on the axe rampage, I hasten to add, more like the bit where he's in his office going, I'm trying to work. That was kind of my experience of the lockdown. I think that alien abduction one, which I got from Twitter from Willow on Twitter, channels how many of us felt by the end of the third lockdown, if not sooner. Sorry. Now, I've got a story to tell you. I haven't put it on the slide, but a very poignant submission from one of our participants telling us a story which is a bit in that vein, and I'm going to put this in her words. So, this is a family joke based on an experience that doesn't seem at all funny, but in some weird way it was. Christmas 2020, in the depths of lockdown and a uniquely unsociable festive season, my daughter's anxiety became extreme, manifesting itself in acute health worries. Convinced she was dying from a million different things, she called out the paramedics nearly every day. Afterwards, she consoled us with, well, at least we had some visitors over Christmas. Okay, so many of us struggled with our mental health during this period, and underlying mental health conditions were often exacerbated to extremes. The context for that story is bleak in all sorts of ways, but it does give us an insight into how humour can emerge at the worst of times. Okay, so this submission on this slide is about how some of us found ways to adapt our social activities. When restrictions loosened up slightly and groups could meet outside, one of our participants, Helen, found a way to continue her friends' meetups to watch Star Trek. So, may I present to you the Trekkie Brekkie. As Helen says, to boldly meet friends to watch COVID-secure Star Trek, you need outdoor screen, outdoor picnic, hot drinks, warm blankets, umbrellas, and subtitles on because of the noise on the umbrellas. Brilliant. Thank you so much for that, Helen. So, many people could not work at home. Key workers, of course, in the NHS, supermarket services, teachers going into schools for the children of key workers, people in the supply chain, so many people, so many professions continued going to work in the most challenging of circumstances. So for those of us who could work from home, the strange world of Zoom calls, like Nicola said, this was not something that was on my radar either, became our new normal. And I hate to use that expression, but it seems appropriate. So these memes represent some of the ways in which we found humour in our new work and social lives through screens. And I want to thank Aisha, Ines and Lauren for these submissions here as well. Okay, so indulge me for one moment. Here is an example of one of my own personal coping mechanisms, okay? So it was a good day in my household when I discovered the shark, bear and pig Zoom filters. Okay, I was tempted to put them on for the talk, but I thought it might detract from the intellectual content delivered by my colleagues. Now, the caption here, I can't remember. Do I work at home or live at work? Now that was submitted by our participant called @LeahNonsense on Twitter, and it had an accompanying cartoon, which is actually part of the exhibition. Now, I think it's telling that of all of the Twitter submissions that we had, this that cartoon and that comment got the most likes. Research tells us that those with desk-based jobs ended up working considerably longer hours than in non-pandemic times. Hence, I think that that submission raised a rather bitter laugh for many. Okay then, folks, now I'm going to give you a dramatic diversion. This is a submission from a friend also called Helen, which this actually involved me as well, just to confuse matters even more. So she submitted the story to us as a short play, and I would like to call on Nicola to play the other Helen in this scene. I will play myself to avoid confusion. Okay, so Act 1 on Zoom, of course. How are you? Do you have any plans for Christmas?
Yeah, fine, thanks. You? Nah, no plans at the moment.
Then would you like to come to ours? We can pick you up and you can stay over and have a drink. And my parents are coming for Christmas dinner as well.
Oh, yes, please. That would be fantastic. If the weather's okay, I could come on my bike.
So far, so good. On blooming Zoom again.
I'm a bit worried about this new variant.
Yeah, sorry, I think we've got to postpone.
If nothing better comes up, we could always meet up for a picnic. I could come on my bike, we could meet at Elderslie, it's halfway between us. You could bring the dog, there's lots of nice places to walk.
Yeah, good plan, good plan. So, Act 3, Christmas Day 2020. Helen too is standing with her bike in the middle of a large roundabout. There is no Zoom, just mobile phones.
Bit of a problem here. My route to Aldersley is thick with ice. We're going to have to change the venue.
Where are you?
I'm on the roundabout near Moseley Old Hall. The road to Featherstone is clear though. Can we meet there and look for a picnic spot?
Well, we could indeed. So, this is how Act 4. This is how Featherstone, home of a prison, a closed paintballing site and a large field, became the #1 Christmas 2020 destination for us.
It does scream Santa Claus, I think.
It does seem festive cheer. Fingers crossed we won't be back there this year. And our apologies to anybody associated with Featherstone. I'm sure it's a lovely place at other times of the year. Okay, enough from me. I'm handing back to Nicola.
So I think one of the big things that we had memes about, and that generally they were kind of, the meme sphere went kind of nuts about, was homeschooling. And this obviously hit quite early on in the pandemic. Suddenly you had people who had, never done a kind of teaching course in their life, solely responsible, I think, to sort of kind of forcing their kids to kind of to kind of knuckle down and do some learning. There is actually a weird little precedent for this. Again, First World War, Vanessa Bell, who's an artist and who's the sister of Virginia Woolf, had to home educate her children. And her son, when he was in his, I think he was in his 80s, he wrote, "She was a really, really brilliant woman, but she made me cry so much over my times tables that I wanted to be adopted." So there's this kind of really sort of kind of difficult sort of thing to have to do, I think, to try and teach your own children. I think, famously teachers like to avoid it. They like to put their children in other classes. So, even if you are part of the teaching profession, it's difficult. One of the things I love actually about the memes that are associated with homeschooling, and you can see so many of them there, is that #1, anyone that's got anything to do with education will recognise firstly the kind of self-effacing sort of tone of these, and secondly the almost ubiquitous call to drink that teaching seems to induce in people. But these were lovely because, these were appearing after 5 hours of homeschooling. So there's some really lovely, really immediate responses. Obviously the difference in experiences that children had were huge. About 95% of children didn't attend in person during the first lockdown. Obviously, children of key workers and vulnerable children would still attend. About 1 in 5 teenagers reported not receiving any work during this period, although they're teenagers, so that doesn't mean they didn't have any. But they, but that's quite a, that's a fifth of children sort of you know, with the parents really taking on that kind of responsibility. And I think it really kind of shows the memes that we sort of looked at, and in general the memes that were out there. There's a lovely one where somebody's left the back to school banner in Asda, which you can see these in the exhibition, but they've restocked the shelf with alcohol, and that was quite a popular sort of meme. I think there is just some really lovely responses really to a terrible situation. And again, a bit like what Helen said with working from home, we have a very varied response here. You've got about 1 in 10 children saying that they're getting less than an hour of schoolwork to do, but you've also got 1 in 10 children saying that they're spending more than 5 hours, which is the amount they're meant to spend when they're in person in the class in the UK on schoolwork. So you've got this incredibly sort of varied experience. And I think that in some ways that memes have provided a way of people kind of going, I don't feel like I'm coping with this, and then other people can go, no, us too. It's you know, I think it could have been an incredibly isolating experience, and I know that for many it was, but I think again memes serve this kind of purpose really of bringing us together. And I think if you work in the teaching profession, that slightly self-effacing kind of sort of camaraderie is something you probably recognize actually, and it very quickly became part of the homeschooling kind of meme sphere. There are other things that sort of that could come out actually as well, and obviously Marcus Rashford was very hot on this on Twitter, that there were other repercussions for children who were kind of at risk of disappearing really. Children that received free school meals, you know, were staying at home, and you know what was going to happen to those children. And again, I think, you know, the social media became a space actually for some of those questions to be asked, and it became impossible to ignore them. So they are a bit of fun. There's a lot of stuff about drinking whilst trying to teach your children, but they do serve a social function that I think's actually quite profound really. About 10% of parents paid for extra tuition, but that's 90% of parents kind of trying to do their best, you know, with what resources they had. And I think it's sort of yeah, the camaraderie that you can see if you go to the exhibition. There's a lot of kind of homeschooling memes, which hopefully you can sort of see them a bit more clearly. But yeah, there's an absolute preponderance of alcohol in them. I think the ratio of alcohol to non-alcohol references is probably something like 9 to 10, 9 to 1. There's sort of like, it's quite astonishing how many references there are. But yeah, it's one of the kind of most fun bits, I think. It's worth checking out if you get the chance to go to the exhibition. The homeschooling sphere is rather nice. And then I think, what have we got next? Oh, we've got lockdown pets. Yeah, so this one's rather lovely. This, I have to say, is close to my own heart. You can see that picture of the dog with his paws over his nose is actually my dog, showing his absolute objection to Christmas, was what he was doing there. He didn't really go for that. But you can see that there's pets occurring in lots of the memes that are not about owning pets, actually. They've got the mask one that Josiane's already looked at, the cat one that Helen's already talked about. But cats and dogs and bunnies and guinea pigs and rats and geckos all became incredibly important. And I think, again, there were little hidden things that happened. I had another student whose partner works in a pet shop, and she just brought home all of the rats and rabbits and goldfish. She had a just menagerie in her house, and they've just kept them. Because the thing is, once a rabbit is older than about 2, people just want the baby bunnies. So she's got this absolute menagerie of pets, but she said it's wonderful. About 3.2 million households added a pet during lockdown, and so that brings the total of households that own a pet in the UK to 17 million. Most of these are dogs and cats, but there are obviously other pets as well. And interestingly, it was mostly young people that were the main drivers of this trend. And I think obviously we hear a lot about the kind of tragedies involved. About 5% of those who acquired a pet have actually given it up already, but 74% of new pet owners have said that the pets had a positive impact on the household. And I think this might be one of the kind of changes that we see. I think that at the start of lockdown, there was a lot of talk about, you know, what's going to happen. Are we going to emerge from this kind of better or worse or the same? And I think the response to kind of to pets and the acknowledgement of what they do for us comes across a lot, again, in the kind of lockdown pet memes, and in just the occurrence of pets in the memes that we received. So, you know, I think there's a lot to be sort of positive about when it comes to pets and memes. And if you just take the chance when you go to the exhibition to have a look at homeschooling, at you know, introverts, at panic buying, that pets just occur across the whole range, more than children, because they're all doing their homework, I think. But pets are just kind of ubiquitous, so which I think is rather nice. Do you want to?
Absolutely right. I'm going to actually skip over a few slides, is that okay? Because I want to kind of get to the, you know, want to guide, be able to hear a bit of what our participants are saying in the chat very, very quickly. But shortly before the first UK lockdown, reports started to come in of empty shelves, and purchase limits were set in some stores. Inevitably, that sparked further panic buying, and everyday items, and Josiane said this, like loo roll, bread, pasta, became sought after, prized possessions. So you'll see, if you come to the exhibition, the scarcity of loo roll looms large in that collage that we've done, an interesting insight into the preoccupations of the British public at this time in history. Okay, Nick, do you want to just say a quick word about this one?
Oh, this is very, very, very quickly. Just this appeared on a website. It's not technically a meme, it's a bit of artwork, really. There was a white senator, who shall remain nameless, in the US, and he talked about the kind of indigenous, First Nation, Native American, as they're sometimes called, history of the people that live in his area. He lived in an area that's got quite a large population of indigenous people in it, and he said, oh, we're warriors, we're not going to wear masks. And one of the artists from that community immediately posted this, and it kind of went slightly viral. It sort of appeared on sort of Twitter and stuff, warrior up with their kind of warriors wearing masks. And again, I think there's something really nice about the fact that the meme sphere could sort of respond really to somebody evoking a culture that isn't their own and saying, well, they wouldn't wear masks, and kind of going, actually, yes, we would. So, you know, again, it's just a way of, I think, like Josiane said initially, kind of speaking back to power, really, I think.
Absolutely, thanks so much, Nicola. And as I said before, we've got the exhibition on Saturday, 3 till 5. I'm going to, when we kind of put the slides down, I'm going to put the link in the chat, but I will also email all participants this evening with that link. So if you're in the local area and would like to come along, you'd be most welcome. And just to reassure you, I won't keep emailing you after this event. Your data will be taken, you know, kind of got rid of from the record. So yeah, don't worry about that. I just want to give a very, you know, very brief 1-minute conclusion. Okay, so the first two memes on this slide are from Aisha, and the one on the right hand side is from Lauren. As discussed, as we've been talking about all along, the pandemic has taken its toll on all of us, physically and mentally. So often the laughter provoked by a meme is because we relate. So Aisha's submissions reflect, I think, the sense of quiet desperation that many of us have felt, whereas Lauren's encapsulates pretty much what we've been exploring this evening. Our mental health might have sprung a leak, or in some cases a raging torrent, but memes can, at the very least, paste over the cracks just for a bit. And at their best, they bring us together in a shared acknowledgement of the difficulty of our various situations, but they can also help us feel less alone. Okay then, thank you so much to everybody that has tuned in this evening, and over to you. Okay, so I'm just going to I'd really like to hear in the chat of people's favourite submissions, any questions, further comments. So I'm going to stop sharing for a moment, just so I go, hello, just so I can have a look at the chat. And there's been so many comments that I haven't. So we've got okay, so I'm going to have to work backwards a little bit. So yeah, if people want to, so people are raising their hand, I can't put you off mute, so if you type in the chat if you've got questions and things. So people saying they love the Tilda meme. I love that story from Daisy saying Mum and Dad's village had a raffle with a loo roll with a bow stuck on top as top prize. Brilliant. Helen saying that she looked at the Lego one. Christy is saying the alien one. They just glad to get out the house, really. That one basically. Kerry, okay, one of my favorite Zoom calls was a first year induction. I decided we'd play with the Zoom filters and make up for the first few minutes. All of the students had video and mics off, and I sat there on a beach with a mustache and a hamster. That is living the dream, Kerry. I love it. You're going to do Zoom, do it in style. Absolutely, absolutely. So I'm not going to get through everybody's here. But
She says the Shining meme is brilliant. It makes me want to go, The Shining. Do you want to get sued?
Yeah, like
from The Simpsons. Sorry.
Absolutely wonderful. Louise saying that she liked the Zoom filter idea, could have woken the students up a bit. I couldn't comment on that. Okay. Daisy, my parents got ridiculously excited about being allowed to leave their village to get their jabs. I think they were as glad to be leaving for an hour as they were to get the vaccine. My dad said it was getting a bit midsummer in Norfolk. That's brilliant, Daisy. And absolutely, I mean, I think many of us, the kind of glee at, actually finally having our vaccinations come round. There was very much the sense also of being delighted to get out of the house. It was the most exciting things that happened for ages for many of us. Okay, wonderful. People saying that they've been enjoying them. Yeah, I was just saying about the Shining meme. So yeah, wonderful. Sorry, I'm just scrolling.
I like Louise saying that every time she gets on a train, she always looks for an isolated seat, but now everyone thinks I'm avoiding COVID and not them. I like that.
Brilliant, absolutely. It's the thing, isn't it? In lots of ways, it was sort of like a get out of jail. Pretty hard for awkward situations in lots of ways, and now we have to get back to it as well. So this is Daisy telling us about her first attempt at online teaching. I tried to stream a mystery play we should have watched in class together. Jesus's voice came through Zoom, sounding like a Dalek. It seemed to capture the mood that was to come. Absolutely, that's wonderfully portentous in lots of ways as well. So one from Lauren here. The first online session I was due to teach in March 2020 was supposed to be a film screening, and we all just sat in our final classroom rubbing our hands together with sanitizer and saying, we'll watch the film in 3 weeks when we come back. Bless us. Yeah, it's it's a good one, Lauren. It's so poignant as well, that sort of sense that there was going to be a sooner end to it than inevitably played out. And I'm just going to read out this one from Christy and then see if there's some more kind of further along. In an Always Sunny in Philadelphia episode, I know that courtesy of Christy, from 2013, the gang quarantine in their bar due to a flu outbreak in order to protect their vocal cords for a singing competition. They decide not to drink but have several breaches. They get ill one by one. It turns out they were having withdrawal symptoms when they drink Charlie's stash of booze in the cleaning closet and get miraculously better. Brilliant. And isn't it interesting how much alcohol does loom large in these memes and forms of comedy. Okay, I'm just going to scroll down to the bottom. If anybody else would like to kind of say which their favourite memes was, I'm so sorry if I haven't got to people's stories. I've just tried to kind of skim through any of them, or to ask any other questions, you'd be most welcome. So while people might be typing in the chat, I just want to share this again and just point out to you, as I said at the start. So as I said earlier, this event is sponsored by the Being Human Festival with match funding from the University of Wolverhampton as well. And actually the team led by Professor Dhanda, as I said before, was on the theme of riches, this idea about unlocking resources, remnant ideas, unused skills, buried thoughts. And the theme of Being Human Festival this year, the public festival of the humanities, was about renewal, and this idea about how we can rejuvenate, you know, during while the pandemic's kind of still going on, but also kind of coming out of lockdown as well. So there is a link there to the other wonderful events that are going on via the University of Wolverhampton this week, and I encourage everybody to check those out as well. And let me also in the chat just paste the link to our the exhibition, because it's COVID, it's in person, but it's going to be COVID secure, COVID safe, and so it's limited places. It's limited to 30 places in terms of the space and social distancing, so get your ticket quickly, they're free. But as I said before, that exhibition is there at the moment, worth going. We installed it yesterday, and so it's worth going and seeing while it's still fresh, and it'll be there on Saturday and also going into December as well. Okay then, right, would anybody else like to contribute anything else? I'm just going to have a quick skim through to see if I've missed any jokes here as well. So people saying that they were enjoying Patch Adams. Christy saying about laugh yoga. Yeah, I've seen that. There's got to be something that makes yoga a bit more bearable, I think, laughing. That's just me. That's just me. Let's have a look. Yeah, so Christy's saying that memes about the government. Yeah, Helen's saying about the funny ones about Matt Hancock, because we were aiming not wholly for a family audience, but we didn't want to go too vulgar. But there are some good ones about Matt Hancock in all sorts of ways. Okay then, everybody, so if nobody, you know, we'll stick around for a bit longer, but if nobody wants to type anything else in the chat, it just remains for me to thank again all of our wonderful participants, all of you who have tuned in this evening. We are so grateful that you are able to come, and as I say, you are most welcome to join us for the exhibition on Saturday as well. And I would also like to thank my wonderful colleagues Josiane Boutonnet and Nicola Allen for their excellent contributions today. And take care of yourselves, everybody. I hope you've enjoyed yourself, and thank you again. All the best.
Thank you everyone.
Yeah, thank you.
We'd like to thank you, Helen.
Yes,
thank you for incredible management of this. Well done.
Bless you. Thank you so much. Thank you everybody. Thank you for your lovely comments, and thank you all for participating, and sorry if I didn't get to read everybody's. Thank you Lauren, and thank you for your contributions as well. Thanks, and thanks Helen, thanks Sharon, thank you both so much, and thank you Helen for your excellent contributions. You get my vote, I'm biased. Thank you Meena. Okay, thank you everybody so much.
Thank you everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye. Okay, I just close the chat. Okay, so if people want to log off when they're ready, or if you want to stick around and chat, you're most welcome. Okay, good stuff. Bye everyone. It's like ending a seminar. Okay everybody, bye-bye. Oh yeah, stop recording, that's it. Thanks Meena.